term multifaceted seems to be quite multifaceted in itself, in that it's not new. Of course, it's not a new coinage. We've used the term a lot in casual conversation to refer to somebody who has multiple talents or is successful in various aspects of their lives, what a lot of people commonly term a jack of all trades, right? Which is a great compliment in itself if it weren't also followed by the phrase master of none. So we'll get into that in more detail during the course of our conversation, and also focus on the fact that this is a word whose meaning keeps changing with time, right? Especially in a post-COVID world when there's a focus on the side hustle and people doing multiple little things versus one major specialization professionally as well. And we will touch upon all of these and try and uncover all the various layers of meaning that the term multifaceted has. So I would like to begin by asking you what this term has meant for you as somebody we just heard your introduction. You were a poet, you've been an author, you're a national award-winning voiceover artist, you've brought up a family, you've also been an active social worker. What is the value you attach to being multifaceted when somebody calls you that? And I'm guessing that's quite often.
First of all, thank you so much to the organizers of the Orange City Literary Festival. I'm delighted to be here in the city of oranges. First time in Nagpur, very, very pleased to be here. And of course, it's a pleasure to dialogue with you. Thank you for the opportunity. Yes, my life has certainly had many, many facets. But before we get into my life, I think all women in many ways, and I'm sure I don't want to exclude the men in the audience, we're all multifaceted in so many different ways. Without looking at it, as you said, jack of all trades and master of none, sometimes that happens when you're jack of all trades, is that there isn't an opportunity to really sort of define and hone and cultivate a particular talent. But I think, women have been trailblazers over the years, always. They're always juggling and wearing multiple hats, from being care providers to parents to professionals, mothers, grandmothers. We hold up half the sky. That term originated by Mao Zedong, but it was also used by Cheryl Woodan when she wrote that incredible book about women all over the world and their social service activities. So, we've been doing this for years, and it's not just me. This particular title, Multifaceted Self, as a writer and as a voice talent, and in some ways I sort of see myself a little bit as an educator as well, is quite a lovely topic in that it gives the author on the stage an opportunity to talk about all of their various talents. But as I see it, I just think of it as the sort of holistic aspect of all of us, the ability to be able to do more than one task and to do it with some degree of sincerity and passion. So again, to go back to the idea of jack of all trades, I think if you embark on any activity with sincerity, with honesty, with a certain commitment, we are able to do well at it. So it's not just me, but all of you who are multifaceted.
That's right. We are by default multifaceted, but it's not so common actually to be able to find people who are able to identify their strengths, their assets, leave alone be able to develop them, hone them, and maximize their potential, so to speak. How does one get to that point where one is able to have that clarity of thought and focus to be able to, in a world where you have so many options and choices and everything is a possibility, it's often confusing now, especially for younger people, to recenter and realign with who they are and what the strengths in their specific individuality are, and then to just focus on those. Do you think we get a little lost in the process?
I think that's a brilliant question. I'm not really necessarily equipped to answer it for everyone. We've got to look within ourselves for our own passion and find it. I think if I was speaking to you as parent to parent, and now I'm a grandmother, so speaking about children, encouraging their passion when they are young, not expecting people to necessarily, or children to necessarily follow a subscribed path is a good way of discovery. One of the things that I did in America as an Indian American parent with my children is I wanted to expose them to things that I wasn't good at. I wasn't very good at sport. I don't know if I would have been if I tried it, but I mean, I know how to swim, I know how to do various things, but I wasn't particularly good at it because we spent all our time in those days reading books and writing poems and doing that kind of thing. So I thought, well, I want my children to be well-rounded, so I'm going to make sure that they know how to ride a bicycle, something that I don't know how to do. So, you know, we took them to everything. And then the reward that the child sees is when they do well at something that that they like. So when they go out there and you discover you're good at it, you know, the first time my little child won a gold medal for writing a story in kindergarten, she realized she's a good writer because she didn't know. I mean, she's in a class of 35 students and the teachers and the judges picked her story as the best. That is reward in itself. When you think you win something, you go out and you do it again. So that is an answer to part of your question in any case. How did I discover what I like? What's interesting is that it may seem I have multiple variety of disparate talents, but they're all related in many ways. A lot of the things I've done are essentially all about communication. So I started out my first professional job in the United States was working for an organization that served people with disabilities. And I worked in the capacity of I was a director of development, which is a lofty title, but essentially I was building resources for the clients that we served, who were people with disabilities. Building resources requires communication. I was writing grants, which are very technical kind of writing, but essentially I'm using my words to paint pictures, to tell stories, so to compel other people to support that initiative. It's the same thing with voiceover work. So I'm a voiceover talent. I use my voice to, if it's in a commercial, to sell a product. If it's in a storybook, to tell the story. You know, if it's my voice on your answering machine, to make sure that the salespeople go away, but the others who call will leave a message. You know, so it's all again a matter of communication. It's going out there and using that word or that voice to tell a story. And now, as a writer, whether it's poetry or prose, because I do all of that, it's again using a communication quality. It is using communication skills. So there is a connection in many ways with what I do.
You found your specialization.
So I found my specialization. I mean, they sort of all grew together. You know, in schools in India, we're encouraged, at least, you know, I'm a bit of a dinosaur, and I studied with Irish nuns in a Calcutta convent where we learned how to enunciate and articulate our words. So we had to do Anne met an ant, and you had to hear the T. An ant met Anne. Hello, said the ant. Hello, little man. So, you know, we were taught how to speak. It was an important quality. It was an important skill in those days. Those were the kind of things that we learned. So I always had that, you know, that excitement about wanting to use my voice and speak. So it was there in the past, in my childhood. I liked performing in theater. You know, we had those opportunities. I was fortunate that I was actually, they had only Doordarshan television, which was all about kisans in those days. When I was growing up, we didn't have a television till I was about 13 or 14 in Calcutta. And the only English language channel was called the Youth Program. And I was the first English anchor for the Youth Program. But then I got a scholarship as a teenager and went off to America. So I did 3 stories and then I was gone. But, you know, all of those experiences were there. And when my children left home after, you know, to go to college, I thought, well, you know, I want to do something with all of these talents that I've had. I've always enjoyed using my voice. So let's put money where your mouth is. And I made a little demo tape and sent it off, and the rest is history. So I've been doing voiceover work that way. Once I quit the day job, as they say, and once you're not really wearing that hat as talent manager of your children, you can focus on your own talents.
I'm really glad you brought up the personal aspect of your life, the fact that you've given a significant amount of your life to your children and bringing them up, and only then have you been able to really focus on yourself and what you want to do professionally. And often when we talk about multifaceted people, we discount that aspect of their lives, the fact that, especially with women, and more so in the Indian context, it is the women who experience a setback to their career or a certain break in their career when they decide to get married or have children. And do you believe that the skill set that you develop, even as a stay-at-home mom or somebody who's just focused on your kids' talent management, as you referred to it, all of that also contributes to what you do later in life because you're clearly passionate about it, right?
Absolutely. I mean, a parent, whether it be the father or the mother, is really the first teacher of the child. And if you're not interested and engaged in that process, they're not getting the best teachers, are they? I took the role very seriously. And as an Indian mother, I mean, we Indian mothers have there's a little joke that people say about Indian mothers in America. I don't know if my friends Kairu and Vijay, who went to America recently, discovered that. But Indian mothers are known to be pushy. And I always say, that's not a very good term. The word isn't pushy, it's encouragement, isn't it? It's allowing the children to go out there and do the best that they can. And I truly wanted my children to have the opportunity in another world. I mean, they are Americans because they were born in America, but I was born and raised in India and had the benefit of a wonderful childhood. I really wanted to give them the same opportunities. So it was a choice I made. And there's the plus and the minus of it. It's true that I had to wait this long to really do the sort of writing I'm doing now, and getting an opportunity to engage with children differently and with my children's books. But I was writing all the time, both at work. I'm writing letters. You're writing. A talent you have doesn't really go away. You're also able to be your children's first reader. You're able to give them feedback for that. I was a sort of volunteer supporter of other people's children when they're applying to college and other things. So, we're always using what we have as long as we're willing to share and as long as we feel comfortable about our own talents. I think ultimately it's self-confidence that helps us do what we can do. And, I grew up in a family of talent. I grew up with a mother who other people may have seen as pushy, but a very ambitious mother, a father who encouraged all of our doodles and dawdles and everything else. So we grew up with that kind of opportunity. But, I was a middle child. My sister was a chatterbox. My brother was a star. And it could have very easily been that, I could have just sort of pretended. And I did. Growing up, I would rather be left alone and just read books and didn't go out of my way to talk. But, whatever's there, whatever you've seen, we sort of imbibe from the atmosphere, all of us, don't we? If you expose yourself and your children and others around you to opportunity, we do tend to pick it up. Even at some point it'll surface. I do believe that. So, I made a choice not to focus on writing for my own pleasure when my children were little because I was too busy. I really didn't have time. I was working a full-time job as well as taking care of the kids, traveling with them on weekends for their tournaments and other things. There's only so much someone can do. But if you're interested in it, it's never too late to do anything. And, the studies these days say what is 40 is the... No, 60 is the new 40, right? Or it's the other way around. But, they talk about achievements. The average age of Nobel Prize winners these days, was it 62 or something? I'm very bad with numbers. But I think, it's pretty high up there. A lot of careers starting in the 50s and 60s and all of that. So we all have time yet to do a lot.
True, and it's a great time in the world to for age to become a little irrelevant. I think with the fact that we're so connected with technology, everybody has an equal platform with digitization and social media. I mean, if I decide to start a small business or be a home chef tomorrow, I can just create an Instagram page and then work on creating content.
Well, digital media does that for you.
So it kind of makes the whole idea of entering the race a little later irrelevant, thankfully, for a lot of us who haven't had all of our 20s, perhaps, to focus on career and have been focusing on other things instead. Do you think with that, especially post-COVID, when everybody got a break to kind of withdraw from their mundane routines and introspect and kind of reassess their priorities, there has been a little bit of a shift with people leaving big bucks jobs and just settling for a side hustle or moving back to their hometown to be closer to family or to just indulge in more self-care, the term that's become very, very popular nowadays, or just be there for family or just be present as a parent. Right. And this is more to do with fathers, I think, because with mothers there's always been that kind of multifaceted, multitasking thing has always been expected, and women have ended up doing it. Do you think that jack of all trades is better than a master of one, is perhaps more appropriate to describe the times we live in?
That's a good question, but it does have a value judgment, and I don't want to do that. I would say my husband, for instance, is a master of one, and I'm certainly a jack of all trades. There's value to both. There used to be a time when people thought focusing all of your energies in one particular talent is the way to go. I personally think, if you're multi-talented, use them all. Why not? I also tend to be interested in more than one thing at a time. I'm doing the voiceover work at the same time that I'm writing, my children's books, and I'm writing poetry at the same time that I'm writing prose. I like to be able to do both. In fact, what's particular about my books, which I hope some of them are available out there for sale, is that they're all very, very different. I have what's called a conventional picture book, in Parvati the Elephant's Very Important Day. A picture book by American definition is a book that its storyline is advanced as much by the illustrations as by the text, and it can be no more than 1,000 words. They're very, very distinct. It's a distinct kind of genre of children's writing, and Parvati falls into that. I've written the story, the adventure story, in rhyme, but it's illustrated. So that's one particular kind of book that I've written for children. On the other hand, the latest book that's published is called A Treasure Trove of Timeless Tales, and it's a collection of 14 stories, all written again from a completely different perspective. Some of them are retellings of old classics. Some of them are 100-word stories, and asking children to write 100-word stories themselves. We have a story written in first person. I have stories that are entirely in reflection from an adult perspective of a childhood memory. So we have all kinds of unusual stories. So that's very, very different again. I have an adult book, which is a biography, but not a conventional biography. It's a biography that I wrote as a tribute to women, and by writing a tribute to my mother. And to answer the last question you said, when you have an adult at 82 who's getting on a campaign vehicle because her son is running for politics, or who's renewing her driver's license in her 80s, there's time is never a barrier for what you want to do. And if you live under that sort of umbrella and that sort of home, it's very easy to be able to want to do more than what you're doing. So I don't know, have we diverged a little from your
That's fine, because it brings me to what I want to talk about next, actually. Okay. And I'm glad you brought up your mother, because for those who don't know, you have written sort of a biography.
I can explain what it is.
Yeah, I think you would do better. And I just want to bring up a line I came across that you spoke in an interview with reference to Good Innings, which is the book about your mom. And you said, "My mother felt it was criminal to not live up to full potential." And I want you to talk about your book, of course, but I also want you to touch upon this particular issue. And it again relates to parenting. And I'm thinking that you're the right person to ask this, because you write for children and imagine for children. And so obviously you're someone who believes in the power of childhood to shape, how the rest of your life takes its course. And that is where I want to ask you, as a parent to a 10-year-old myself, where do we draw the line between doing our best to ensure our children get exposure to all kinds of different things so that they can have that wonderful self-discovery about, oh, I'm great at this, that thing you mentioned. And in making sure that in the process we are not perhaps interfering with their natural processes or their natural personality or their natural interests. That becomes a little bit of a conflict in a parent's mind. When so much parenting advice, this term that has gotten coined in the last decade or so much parenting advice is coming your way, which makes you feel like no matter how much you do for your child, you're probably falling short.
Well, that's good. First of all, we're all critics of ourselves, and I think at some point we've got to tell ourselves we can only do the best we can. And I'm sure there are older and younger parents here who feel the same way that, we could have done this or we could have done that. Hindsight is always 2020. I think ultimately children today are, they're like sponges. It's not so much what you say, but what you're doing that they're observing in any case. So if you're not sincere in your articulation, they're going to catch you out. I also am so excited with, as a children's writer, one of the greatest things that I've experienced is that opportunity to engage with children. I have, with the last books that I did, I was going into classrooms, into schools, into, bookstores and other sessions where children get so excited. I wrote the book on poetry. I have another book on poetry that's come out that's entirely a book of poems. And that book I'm very, very proud of because in some ways, I've met a lot of young kids, at least in America when my children were in school, who used to say, we don't like poetry, it's very scary, it's like math, it has rules, it has all this rhyme scheme, and it has format and structure, and so we're not sure we like it. And I did a volunteer class with 5th graders, so about 10-year-olds, where at the end of the day, they'd all written poems, and we all had a blast. We laughed, we sang, we did all kinds of fun things. And essentially, that stayed with me for a while. That was done when my children were in 5th grade, which was years ago. But I told myself, I need to write a book of poetry because I love poems. I love the sound of the music in them. I like even straight verse without a specific rhythmic rhyme scheme. I love hearing the sound that words make in my ear, and maybe not just because I'm a voice talent, but because of what we can do with it. And then there are so many different kinds of poetic forms. In fact, even in Delhi the other day, there was a parent-children thing related to my book, and so many parents came to me and said, we didn't even know that there were so many different kinds of poetic forms. And so they were laughing. And I introduced simple ones like a limerick or an acrostic, which kids today in 1st grade and 2nd grade are doing it. They're writing their own. But I also have a villanelle or a sonnet. And what I've done is I've described the poetic form in the shape of the poetic form. So a sonnet is written in 14 lines with an octave and a sestet, and it has if it's an Elizabethan sonnet, it ends with a couplet. So we have the iambic pentameter, the 10 beats to the line, and it's very structured. But what makes it interesting is there's an example poem after that particular poem, and the example poem is about, a child throwing away and eating Lay's chips and Coke and getting a stomachache. And the reality is when you read that poem, you laugh aloud, you enjoy it, and then because you've read the sonnet, you realize, oh my gosh, this one's a sonnet too. We think when we hear the term sonnet, oh my God, it's Shakespeare, or it's some other well-known poet, and it's going to be a scary thing. It doesn't have to be. So I introduced 9 poetic forms with examples, and then we use the sort of skills we've learned, or rather we hope that the readers will use the skills we've learned, because in this case, I use the skills we've learned. And the second half of the book is introducing other concepts, and I bring in, so this is where the sort of teacher-parent hat in me surfaces in all of my books. I tend to need to do that, always deliver something that has a takeaway. I suppose in some ways, my books are beloved of parents as well as children for that reason, because hopefully it entertains, but there's also something else that you can go back and look up. I obviously, as a children's author, all of us, and I'm sure the others who write will agree with me, is that our job would be, or we hope that book will have a pride of place in your home library or coffee table or somewhere else. That is the whole notion. You write because you want people to read the book. And the only way that people will read the book, but not just read the book once. Yes. I always say, if your children are interested, is it a 5-minute warning?
Sure, we'll take care of that.
Okay, all right. You want them to come back to their favorite books. I think I should stop so you can do what you need to do.
Okay, so we're just left with the last few minutes of this session, and so I want to get one more question out of the last bit that you mentioned, which is, of course, about your writing for children, which is not easy.
Right.
Because children have short attention spans, and for them to read one book cover to cover once, I would say, is quite an achievement. So this is where I want to get back to the topic, actually, and ask you that this is only possible if you are also in touch with the softer facets of your own personality, and then the childlike quality in you is alive, right? So the more intangible qualities, the more genuine qualities that you had when you came into the world kind of also need to be kept alive as you grow older, and they do contribute to the other facets of your personality. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Honestly, absolutely. That's wonderful that you say that. I think it's very, very important. I think if you don't feel that excitement, it's true that I can talk on and on about some of the books that I've written, because once the books are written, I don't even see them as something I've created, but as to what they can do for the readers. And then I get very, very excited. And you can hear that excitement usually when I chat. And so I think having to, you've got to sort of look at it once, as I said, once it's out there and then it's produced by the publisher, it's a product like anything else. It may be a product that you put into life, but it is a product that you hope will be something that other people will go back to. And you said, to get a child to read a book even once is hard. But if the book is interesting enough, they'll go back, it'll be a favorite,
It almost becomes a thing of security and safety for them, right?
Exactly.
If I can just get your final thoughts on what it means to be multifaceted in 2022 as a professional, as an individual.
Well, I think you've got to be present. You've got to be there. You've got to want to be there. You've got to show up. It's a very American term, show up, but you really have to show up. If there's an opportunity that your talent takes you towards, be there, be ready to do it. No, don't shy away. Harness your energy. I'm trying to think. I think it was Maya Angelou who said that creativity, just like our Indian Akshay Patra, there's no sort of end date to it. You can continue to produce all the time. So I'm misquoting Maya Angelou, but she did talk about creativity. And she said that in relation to a conversation she'd had with some young writers, that you don't use up creativity. The more you use, the more it develops. So, multifacetedness is there in all of us. We all have to sort of dig within. My only advice, as I said, is show up, be present, be aware, be interested, be engaged in the things that interest you. I really strongly say that, if you're insincere about your efforts, if you're not honest in your affection for something, it's going to show up. You've got to feel that sincerity, and then it leads to excellence.
Lovely. I think that's a wonderful note to close this session on. I hope you found it as enlightening and interesting as I did. Thank you so much, ma'am, for being with us here today.
It was entirely my pleasure. Your questions were superb.
Thank you so much.
And if we digressed, it's partly because I guess I'm multifaceted.
That's what we called you here for. So thank you so much.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm going back to the term exposure again, and not exposure as we've seen in, when I hear words like exposure, you think of those flashing stories. I think you have to be aware of what's out there, and that is reading, attending these kind of lectures, going to see people, we grew up reading. We didn't have TV, we didn't have video games, we played word games at home, we entertained ourselves. Our exercise was, put music on and dance at home. It's the Indian jugaad, whatever the opportunity, create that excitement for yourself. So if you don't, my brother used to say he used to read the newspaper that something came wrapped in if he ran out of books to read. So if you really want to read, you can do that too. How do you know what you like? Once you read a particular kind of thing, if you read a poetry book and you discover, gosh, I really like poetry. I've been, for instance, through LinkedIn, somebody had got in touch with me to give feedback to a young poet who was about 14 or 15 years old. And they had written something and we looked at it, and it was very deep and very dark and quite depressing in some ways. And I was surprised that this young child was writing these stories. But it's what moved him, and it's not for you and me to judge, what brought him, as long as it wasn't suicidal thoughts or anything, but it was really dark, deep reflections on, on the tragedies around us in the world. And I wrote back something and I said, clearly at his young mind, this is what had affected him. But I was hoping that, he's also reading some humor and other things as well. It really is what you open your eyes to. And then you will discover where your talents lie. I can't really, there's no magic potion. We grew up doing certain things. Nobody else in my family used to draw, but I I liked it. And
Yeah.
I don't know how I did, but I did. And
Yeah.
I would look at little photographs and try to copy it. So, the skill starts coming on its
Coming up.
own.
Absolutely.
So that's what it is.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much.